Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys Season 3, Episode 5. It is called The Last Time to Look on This World of Lies. So full spoilers for the episode as always, and this is becoming kind of a trend with The Boys. I don't really remember in Season 1, but Season 2 and 3, I feel like this is now twice in a row where there's a real kind of like, in a good way, there's a good curve in quality in the middle where things really start to ramp up. And maybe you could argue that that's just how storytelling's supposed to go. But I really liked last week's episode and I really liked this week's episode. And I feel like the developments, especially towards the end of this episode, felt very well thought out. It felt very in character. Like, it was a nice swerve at the end, what Billy does to MM, but it was like, oh, this makes sense. It's one of those things where he does something kind of shady, and you're like, what's he doing? Why is he drugged MM? But then when it clicks, and it clicks quickly, when you realize what he's about to do, it all makes sense. You understand that he is going to make a deal with Soldier Boy because he wants Soldier Boy to fight Homelander, and it's still very dark and like a shitty thing to do, in a general sense, but in a specific sense with MM, because this season has went out of its way, and this episode included, when he sees Homelander making his speeches on TV and he's getting upset that his daughter's watching it and he's having these kind of panic attack style moments. But it's been doing this sort of stuff all season. It's showing that Soldier Boy is to MM what Homelander is to Billy, in the sense of like his passion and obsession, and how much like his entire goal and his pursuit of like hunting soups is based on this one person that ignited this fire. And Billy, he effectively at the end of this episode says, I'm screwing you over because my rivalry, my vengeance, my justice, whatever you want to call it, is more important than yours. And it's a really shitty dick move, but it's also one that you can kind of see coming from Billy. And I didn't see it coming before the moment, but as soon as it happened, I'm like, I get this. I get why you're doing this. I am not surprised that you're doing this. And that's a sign of really good character writing, because immediately I kind of like, it just made sense that he would do this. The big sort of more gut punch is that Huey knows about it and is in on it and is also lying about it. And that plays into what we were talking about last episode, with him becoming more corrupted by Billy and him doing more things. And what's so good about the way the character's been written this season, and it's something that there's a lot of little things early on in the season that I didn't necessarily feel anything for, and if anything I was a little bit worried about where they were going to go. And I still kind of feel like I don't necessarily need to have Huey and Starlight have relationship troubles per se, like normal ones, I guess, anyway. But the choice where she is like, please don't go, and he goes anyway at the end, I think still hit kind of hard. And the reason why I think it works is there's a moment in this episode when Starlight gets home and Huey's there, and it's right before he tells her everything that's happened, and it cuts ahead and she's down in the booze because she can't handle the fact that Huey had superpowers for a day, and he, of course the mission ended up being a failure. There's no weapon, although by the end they kind of are saying Soldier Boy is the weapon. But there's a moment where he pulls out a jar of something and he just opens it. And I didn't even mention, at least I don't think I mentioned this in the first couple episodes, but there was a couple of different scenes where he would try to open a jar and Starlight would have to do it. And I think I said a big theme of this season was racism and the dynamics between those in power and those without, in terms of race. But I also think there's another theme that's definitely here this season, and it's always, much like the racism stuff, it's always been here, because Homelander especially has always been a big thing about this. But the masculinity and the idea that Huey on some level maybe feels emasculated because Starlight is more powerful and because she's stronger. And Huey, of course, is a very nice guy, typically, right? But the idea that even there's these little hints and there's these little things that are bothering him, because what he says repeatedly this episode is that he wants to save her for once for a change. It really bothers him that she's the one doing the saving all the time. And, she says, I don't need you to save me, I just need you. And that's why the ending's really sad. There's just a really sad decision he makes, because he kind of goes down this path of, no, I have to go try be the hero for once. And he admits that he liked having powers, and it felt great, and so on and so on. Superpowers being an allegory for drugs in some way. Of course, Billy sort of hits in that a lot, because he compares them to actual drugs at one point in this episode. But this idea of him needing to feel more of the man, I suppose, is kind of like an examination of a relatively good character, someone who we like, someone who generally has good intentions at heart, and how he still falls victim to these attempts, because anyone can in some ways, right? Anyone can sort of lose themselves in a minute and feel motivated by something that in hindsight later they can look back on and analyze and sort of understand why they felt that way and why they maybe did something stupid or said something stupid or whatever. But I think that adds like some like I think the really in your face stuff with the boys is obviously great, and it handles it very well with like what Homelander represents and everything that we're doing with some of the other characters. But I think when you have it affecting other characters like this in more subtle ways, it's not super subtle, but more subtle ways than certainly the Homelander stuff is, you kind of add layers to it, and it does make it feel like a proper examination of the subject, as opposed to just, oh, there's a wacky interpretation of it. No, it's not just the wacky interpretation. You've actually got the nuance of it as well. And that's actually really neat. And it's, it ties into what Billy says to Maeve this episode, is that, supes are just people. It's not the superpowers that are really the problem. They just heighten all of the bad shit that we have in us anyway. Like, all this, and that's kind of that's exactly what Homelander's been this whole time. All these things he feels, there's people out there who feel this way, but he's given this obscene amount of power to use it and manipulate people with it, and scare people with it, and so on and so on. So I feel like thematically this episode was firing in all cylinders, where every single theme was bouncing into each other's theme, and it was every character like pairing was enhancing other character pairs, because they were contrasting, because they were I like another big one I've been talking about since episode 1 of this season is Billy and Homelander, and how they're kind of the two extreme ends of the same coin, effectively, right? And I think Billy hitting that a lot again this episode when he's with Maeve. Like, there was a scene with Maeve where they end up having sex, and he says he hated Beyond Powers, and this contrasts a little bit with Huey, but he says he hated Beyond Powers. The whole point of this, and this is a debate he has with MM as well when he's trying to argue for taking Compound V, but when he's talking to Maeve, he says he hates it. He says he felt horrible the whole time, and like he says that all supes have to be taken down. It's not just Homelander, it's you and everyone else. Like, this is something that people shouldn't have. But the reason why I'm kind of the thing I'm getting at here is the bit that specifically stuck out to me is when he starts talking about how it made me a worse version of me. It enhanced the worst things about me, and that's when he goes on to say, that's what everyone, it's not the powers that are the problem, it's just being human, and then the superpowers make it worse. This idea, if we're saying Billy and Homelander are two sides of the same coin, this idea that when he's got these powers, that he is more like Homelander than he ever has been, right, in that sense. And I don't think it's an accident that the power we see him get is one of Homelander's powers. I think that's very intentional. In some level, they are genetically kind of similar, or in some way that, like, there's no hint yet that he gets all of Homelander's powers when he takes the Temp V, but at least on some level, it is not a thematic accident that he is getting one of his powers. I don't think that is, so I think that's really good stuff. And even the idea that Maeve, and this is calling again into question the idea that Maeve had a relationship with Homelander, but it wasn't necessarily one that she wanted, whereas here she actually sees something in Billy, even though he's just said that he wants all supers to be gone. And it's a bit of this kind of interesting power play, sort of, in the sexual act between them, where they're kind of not like going for dominance per se, but like, like they sort of switch driver's seats a little bit back and forth, and it kind of, I think it sort of plays into question again, like sort of what Maeve is getting out of this, where this is not like with Homelander, and she arguably never enjoyed it with Homelander in any kind of, she always maybe felt pressured or under duress or, if not outright forced. But here, this idea that it kind of ties into the Ashley thing a little bit almost. It's not the exact same, but, the way Ashley is enjoying being dominant in a sexual sense with people right now, because it is kind of making up for how the opposite her life is with Homelander. She is this subservient, scared character. So she's getting off on doing guys with strap-ons, right? To put it as bluntly as possible. She's getting off on being the one in charge, the one with the power. And so much of this show is about the people who have power, literal or otherwise. So anyway, that was a bit of a spiraling point, but hopefully the points I was trying to make kind of came out of that okay. But there was there was a genius, or there's a method in the madness there. I don't want to say genius, that sounds egotistical. But yeah, so yeah, that's good stuff. I like that, and other little bits and pieces. I mentioned Ashley there when Starlight goes to Ashley and says, "Hey, what's happened to Maeve?" Because it looks like Homelander's at the very least kidnapped Maeve with the help of Black Noir. At worst maybe killed her. I don't think she's dead yet. I think that'd be weird to kill her off screen, but certainly Homelander's cleaning house. He's not putting up anyone who disagrees with him, and there's not a lot of Homelander in this. In fact, one of the things that I thought was really good about this episode is that I've been enjoying the season. I loved last week's episode. I thought it was the best up until now. Maybe this might be better. I'd have to really think about it, but I think what's good about this episode is that I felt like the rest of the show leveled up to the Homelander stuff. Like, Homelander was kind of like sticking out as having all the good stuff last week. This week, it feels like everything else kind of leveled up. At least the main stuff with Soldier Boy and Billy, and like all those dynamics between these characters in this kind of mission. Because Soldier Boy, I was going to say Ashley and Starlight. Ashley has a moment where it looks like she's almost going to actually like open up and really be honest about Homelander, but then she backs off and goes back into like Homelander shell mode out of fear. And it's a sad moment. It's a sad moment because you want her to, like, and Starlight confronts A-Train, who denies it, of course. And he has a whole thing. We'll talk about his disaster this episode, but Soldier Boy, though. Let's stick with Soldier Boy. So Soldier Boy hitches a ride back to the US. And obviously all the other characters come back as well. But he ends up exploding with his power in the middle of a street and like taking out a building. And there's a guy asking him if he needs any help, and he gets like melted instantly. It's pretty gnarly, there's nothing as outrageous this week in a gore perspective as last week's dildo scene, but it was a more traditional kind of like brutal death. But so this idea that they're looking for Soldier Boy, they go to Paul Ryzer, who I can't escape right now because he's also in Stranger Things, but it was nice to see him. He seems to be the old Stillwell kind of character, but he was more of a sleazy movie producer, and they were making a lot of movies with the characters, and there's lots of photos of him with various movie stars of the past. But he ultimately gives up where Soldier Boy is going, which is to see Crimson Lady, his ex that we saw in episode 2. And we have our characters tie her up, blindside her when she's doing a private Skype like sex chat call with Seth Rogen. I mean, obviously he's not actually, it's Seth Rogen playing the character. It's not meant to be Seth Rogen. I mean, I suppose it could be. I mean, that's the reason why it couldn't be, I suppose. I mean, they only give you his username, which is like come something number. I can't remember. If I'm going to like make any critiques about the episode, because the episodes are a full hour long, and sometimes I do feel a little bit of the pacing. And if I was to say I would trim anything down, because I'm okay with the show being eccentric and having its things. This is the sort of thing where maybe it went on a little too long. This call between Crimson Lady and Seth Rogen. It probably goes on about 3 times as long as it needs to. Like, it probably could have, like, you get the joke that this is a sex chat kind of thing, or sex call that he's paying for, and eventually, Billy or whoever dives in, and they tie her hands up so she can't do her blasts. But it goes on for a while. It's a little indulgent and just sort of like milking the cameo. And obviously Seth Rogen's a producer on the show, so there's a reason why like they've got him for this. He probably wanted to have a cameo at some point, but you know, this is just, it's a minor critique. This is not a big thing. You know, the other thing would maybe be like the dance, like musical style sequence. And I'm not completely. I know people might say, "Oh, you just don't like musicals," but I do think it went on a bit long. Like I think you can. I am okay with like Kimiko having this little fantasy in her head for a moment and like coming out of it. But it is like a full sequence where she goes through the hospital and it lasts like 2 minutes or whatever it is, and you can get the point across and maybe make it a little shorter. Not big complaints. I'm just kind of, if I'm going to try and be critical and try and point out things that I do think where it's maybe doing a little too much of something, or it's having its cake and eating it too. But the beauty of the show is that they actually do show a lot of good craftsmanship in how they, like, what they have as a story for an episode, where the episodes do feel like they have a beginning, middle, and end. I always feel like I get a full chapter out of it. So the odd little extension here or there to do these little things they want to do for the jokes or whatever is totally fine. And then some feel less intrusive than others, of course. But those were just the two in this episode that felt maybe just a little much. Not in terms of like including them, just in terms of how much time they took up. But yes, so yeah, and we get the reveal with MM. So I really liked the ending of the episode, and I like Starlight's reaction when she first finds out about Q taking Temp V. It was a funny cut to her just downing the White Claws. So I had a good time with the main plot in this episode. And Homelander's got a couple of bits. He gets mad at the lady at the board meeting, and he's like almost like upset and annoyed that he has to talk about shareholder meetings and stuff. He's like, oh, that's what this job is. So I'm curious to see if there's any more kind of like him just like not giving a shit about that side of things and like throwing it under the bus and whatever chaos that may cause. But he puts the Deep in charge of the crime division, which leads to most people getting fired. So we see the lady who likes to eat the almond bars again. Starlight likes them too. I was not expecting this character to come back, but I got who it was immediately. So it was a nice callback. But yeah, so they're looking into what Soldier Boy's been doing. A-Train's side of the episode is like this is almost like the Deep, like the Deep is kind of frequently had these things where he's tried to do something good, but it ends up getting like the whale killed or the dolphin killed, and it's kind of funny. A-Train's plot in this episode was like a very serious version of that, where it wasn't funny. It was, he, like, because he ratted out Starlight and Super Soaker, that's what I'm calling him, deal with it. Because he ratted them out, like, oh, we'll throw him a bone. So, there's this B-level superhero will come in and have a meeting with him. And he's a bit, he clearly doesn't like understand or like take in what he's been told. He just agrees to apologize. He's kind of a douchebag about it. And sure enough, when A-Train springs him on this community meeting, this community building in like the neighborhood, he just brings him in without warning anyone, and they're kind of like put off by it. But he the guy tries to kind of give a PR approved but clearly insincere apology. And when they start asking him questions, when they start heckling him, and start demanding to know things, he starts saying like the most just like boilerplate stuff. Or, the phrase "all lives matter" comes up. The phrase, he starts talking about how there's more crime in the black neighborhood, and that's why he has to go. It's not his fault. So he keeps saying these things, and because they keep getting angry at him, and rightfully so, because he's been a douchebag, eventually he gets agitated and starts throwing them around the room and injures a bunch of them, and A-Train kind of has to step in and sort of tell him to go. But when he turns round, it's his own brother who's like lying there injured, unconscious, and we find out in the hospital afterwards that he will never walk again. And it's like, oh shit, you really messed this up. You didn't even think this through, and now your brother's hurt, and I can't imagine he's going to be too pleased with you when he wakes up. It's a very interesting thing to do right after he's also done this like betrayal in the other plot. The idea that he got someone else killed, because he's sucking up to the main villain of the show, Homelander. I think Starlight even has the line, why are you trying so desperately to be liked by people who hate you, or something to that effect. And that kind of thematically plays in with this here. He's playing the company ball. He's doing the things rather than like sort of standing with his community and sort of understanding what they're saying to him. He's kind of oblivious and ignorant to everything going on around him, and it bubbles up to this moment, and I do wonder if there's a serious arc coming up for A-Train. I don't know how you redeem him in the eyes of the audience, because he has done some pretty heinous shit now. I mean, it's one thing when he accidentally ran into someone in the premiere episode. It's another thing when he is choosing to turn people in and getting them killed. I do wonder if he sort of has like a redemption via death kind of thing, where he helps take out Homelander or something, but dies in the process, or I don't know what. But it does feel like he can't really start earning redemption until he's completely understood all the choices he's made and all the mistakes he's made along the way. And maybe this is the start of that, because now he's someone he actually cares about has been hurt. But certainly up until that moment in this episode, it felt like he was still annoyed and not feeling like this was exactly what he wanted. He didn't really challenge it enough. He just kind of went along with it, and tragedy happened. So curious to see what they do with this going forward. But it certainly was a development that upped the stakes of it, I suppose, if you will. Elsewhere, Frenchie and Kimiko in the hospital, and Kimiko's powers seem to be gone. I don't think they're gone for good, of course, but she is delighted that they're gone. And this is a reaction that we probably should have predicted, even, I would say, because of how she has been all season. Of course, the irony being is that Frenchie is immediately in trouble. Nina wants him to kill not only someone, but someone and their little kid. And Frenchie doesn't want to, of course, and Nina even implies that this is something he's been willing to do before. So, maybe another main theme of this show is redemption, because you've got this idea of Frenchie going through redemption, and maybe that's almost like a card that can be played by the writers at some point, that we're rooting for characters who have done really bad things in the past, and we're kind of willing to forgive them and root for them and accept their redemption. Maybe that's how you play the A-Train thing, is like, just because we didn't see what Frenchie did in the past necessarily, we're still on board with him, so we kind of have to be willing to forgive other characters for things that we have seen on the show. That could be very effective, actually, if they really sort of somehow, tie those things together. Not in a direct way, but like just in a way that it hits the audience a little bit when we're thinking about it. I think that would be quite smart, actually. So, they kiss for the first time. It's actually quite sweet. Frenchie gets uncomfortable and leaves, but then when he's like standing at the vending machine, he kind of gets this little smile, and he's really happy. And then of course he's kidnapped by Nina. It's right before the kiss though, where we're in Kimiko's head. There's this big musical number when she's singing, and of course that ties back to her imagining singing back in like the first episode or two, and she does actually kind of say something. It obviously doesn't come out clear. She's not spoken in a long time, but she is able to speak. I didn't realize that her powers were tied to her not being able to speak, but the fact that she's losing her powers and is starting to speak now would kind of imply that they are. That would be I don't know what to do with that. But anyway, so Frenchie's in trouble, and this idea that she's going to want to be able to save him is kind of interesting now, where she's going to have to maybe accept getting her powers back if she has a say in it, if she has a choice in the matter. She may not, but if she can take Temp V or unlock her powers again in some way, it'd be curious to see how that goes. What was interesting here is that this plot, of course, is very separate to everything else right now, and you would hope that the other characters somehow become aware that Frenchie's in trouble, because this could just be Kimiko and Frenchie for a bit, and that's why it is on her to save him, because there's no one else. That would be a shame, but obviously it makes sense for the journey, and because to go back to kind of a lot of these themes that we're dealing with in the show, with no one should have this power. That's a line that MM has. It's a line It's implied heavily by Billy when he's talking about soups and how they all need to be taken down because the powers are too much. There is also this other side of this, which is that, you know, most soups didn't choose to have their powers. It's not their fault that they have them. So they shouldn't be villainized just for having superpowers. And it's an interesting kind of exploration to play at. And I think Kimiko's arc and her story about not wanting to be a monster and seeing her powers as what causes that monster or that monstrosity, I think it goes back to what Billy said about, like, everyone's just human, the powers just make it worse. But I think the plot we can do with Kimiko here is that if she accepts her powers and realizes and accepts that she can do good with them, as long as she like makes sure she's doing good with them, she doesn't have to be a monster. She can be, well, you know, an effing superhero, to quote Starlight. And that could be a very uplifting beat in this idea of accepting of who she is rather than hating what she is, because it's not her fault. And that, you know, in a lot of ways ties into some of the other themes as well, you know. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and I think this episode especially, it felt like a lot of the different characters and what they're going through, there was a lot of themes just kind of neatly, you know, neatly connecting with other plots and connecting between other character groups, and just I definitely felt a strong sense of narrative and sort of mission statement for what the season's doing right now. So yeah, I'm excited. You know, and obviously I do want everyone to be happy again by the end of the season, but I realize that we can't just have people be happy all the time, because then there'll be no story and there'll be no stakes and there'll be no drama and there'll be no build to things. The trick is not doing cheap forced drama, and there is always a chance with Huey and Starlight that they can sort of inch towards that by having like the whole, oh, we need to be truthful to each other kind of thing. But I kind of, there's enough meat there in what the actual disagreement is, especially in the choice at the end, that I am totally okay with it. If anything, the only real problem is the constant bringing up in dialogue of being honest with each other. That was really the only thing that felt a little soap opera or, you know, like CWS kind of thing. But it's very minor, because the actual meat is there for the real drama of it, which is him feeling, you know, not even if he would never say this out loud, even if he's not realized that he's emasculated per se, but the idea that he needs to try and be the man in the relationship and all the themes that ties into in the show. So really good stuff. And the idea of just how intoxicating power is, and obviously the perspective of characters who have never had superpowers before but now do, versus characters who have had them since childhood, is also another thing that maybe we can explore, and how it affects them. Like, are they more level-headed about it? I mean, so far it wouldn't seem so necessarily, but I wonder if they become more level-headed about it because they remember what it was like not to have power, as opposed to always having this to lord over people kind of thing. But it's very interesting. And MM stayed true though. MM refused to take any Temp V, even when Billy was really trying to talk him into it. He refused to do so. So this uneasy alliance with Soldier Boy is, I think, it's a fascinating step forward. It's a natural step forward. But also, what happens, even if this works, which I'm not convinced it will, there's every chance in the world that Soldier Boy and Homelander might end up being buddies or something. Like, maybe they'll like see a lot in each other themselves and be like, you know what, maybe we could team up and be like a duo of like people. I did kind of like Soldier Boy walking down the street though, and just sort of noticing things, because he's been like locked up for like 30-40 years. There's like a gay couple, for example, that he kind of like looks at and smirks about because he's like, oh, that's a thing now. But he also sees like the bus advert for the Dawn of the Seven movie, and he's like, who are these assholes? What the hell? I mean, he recognizes Black Noir because he knew him. But yes. It also seems to be that his entire team, except maybe Sidekick, were probably in on like whatever happened with the Russians, and we see glimpses of him being tortured. Like, that's one of the first things you see in the episode is MM watching this torture and experimentation footage, and it's kind of this thing where I wouldn't say he's enjoying it per se, but you know, he's very intently watching it, and he's obviously feeling a lot of mixed feelings about it as he's watching it. So, yeah. So, very good. The show is very good, unsurprising to no one. So, yes, let me know what you thought of episode 5 of The Boys in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. I always appreciate it. Of course, you can support the show by hitting the super thanks button below the video. You can also head over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your troubles. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?